And you touched on there, Dave, actually about HTML5, and obviously, the growth of smartphones, particularly with Apple, I guess, meant that all of a sudden we had this growth in this kind of app environment, and the growth of the App Store kind of came from that. But with smartphones now, obviously they've got better browsers and do you think HTML5 is going to make a big difference to this particular debate?
Yeah, as the support grows within the smartphone browsers, as the HTML5 standard starts to speed up and sort of pick up some of the more advancements, because there's no reason, for example, a smartphone browser can't access the accelerometer, the thing that knows your phone's tilting. Some browsers can and some can't. They can store things locally, so where I was talking about in the tube using your phone, that's still potentially possible in the browser, but the problem is it's so it's so inconsistent, that support, that at the moment it's not a reliable option. So the answer is yes, it's going to become incredibly important, and this debate will probably go away in a few years when that HTML standard gets widely adopted and the smartphone operators have reached a sort of base level of implementation where you can do most of the stuff we want to do as sort of marketing people and clients within a phone's browser.
Yeah. And I think the point that extends from that is it's kind of the responsibility then starts to fall to brand owners, retailers, to use this technology well. The reality is the pace of the technological revolution has never really been determined by the technology alone. The technology kind of looks after itself. Brands, we have to look at consumer behaviour and consumers' willingness to use this stuff. I remember about 3 years ago getting a puncture in my car on the Euston Road. Now, obviously, it was Euston Road, so it was only moving at about 3 miles an hour. So I thought to myself, shall I try and limp the car to my office in Paddington? Or better still, what I'll do is almost certainly the good people at QuickFit will have facilitated a good mobile site that will help me find a tyre bay very near to here. 10 minutes later, as my BlackBerry was loading the "you can't get better than a QuickFit fitter" video, I realised that they hadn't embraced the need for people to use their mobiles in situations like that at all. And it's quite interesting. I heard someone last week talking about the difference between dining and snacking, and he was talking about the difference between the internet and the mobile internet. And if we look at how the BBC treat that, if you go to bbc.co.uk sitting at your computer, you get this rich, personalised kind of deck of multimedia content, whereas if you access it from your mobile device, it will get you the football score you want very quickly. And I think that's really, really important, that once the technology is in place and the technology is stable, we shift the responsibility, I guess, to people like us and to our clients to utilise it such that their customers get the best out of it.
Just while we're talking, I remember a survey we did about 10 years ago, excuse me, where we asked some young people, how important is technology in your life? And we were specifically referencing sort of the internet, just plain old school, through your browser internet. And much to our surprise, they all came back and they said it's not important at all. In fact, technology is boring. And we thought, whoa, what's going on here? And what actually, we delved a bit deeper, and it turned out that they no longer saw the internet as technology. They see it as a utility. They turn on the tap, water comes out. They flush the toilet flushes. It's a good debate we're having, but we always need to remember, what is our audience thinking of? They probably aren't even aware that there's a difference between a mobile web label and an app label. They just want cool stuff. If you're looking at kids, they want cool stuff. Other audience might want something that's a bit more functional. And technology is often a solution, but it's very much a how. So I'd rather we very quickly think about, so what are you actually trying to achieve? And one of the things we always think about is, what is the shelf life of this thing that you're building? So, for example, if you're building something that's functional, so let's say you're eBay or EasyJet, and you want to create an application that's going to be the front of house for all your commerce, well, obviously that's going to last a hell of a long time, and you better make sure you pump a lot of money into that solution. It could be that you're just a challenger brand. You're a new brand in an existing sector. You want to create a bit of noise. Then an app which has got a shelf life of only one experience, hit you hard in between the eyes, fantastic engagement experience. That's all that's required. And so looking back at the objective of whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, naturally the technology solution will will get distilled down. So there'll be a wait for HTML5. It's going to be another year or so, or 2 years. We're all on 24-month contracts nowadays. If your phone, if you bought a phone the last 6 months ago, you might be HTML5 ready. If not, you've probably got another year and a half to wait on your contract. probably as is the rest of the UK. So there are solutions right here, right now that you can do. But just first of all, look at what you're trying to achieve.
I mean, I think your point about how HTML5 ready is your phone is important, but that's only if you really, really need to do some really high-end stuff on the phone through the browser or indeed through an app. The fact of the matter is, a well put together mobile website will use HTML5, which in effect is not really a thing. It's more just using JavaScript and CSS and media queries in order to produce some nice experience, such as page transitions and so on. There's a bit more to it than that. But ultimately, if you build it properly, then you will have a fallback position for pretty much every browser that's going to go on there. And the other thing to bear in mind is that pretty much the only browsers that are going to be going on the mobile web in a year, 18 months, are going to be smartphone browsers. So any worries about, oh, we need to be able to make sure that Nokia 6310s can use this, you can pretty much forget about now, because those people have upgraded to smartphones if they have any propensity to go online. So a mobile web solution can provide some pretty high-end stuff with the limitations, obviously, that we've talked about, but actually you're covering almost everybody in one of the easiest possible ways to get people to interact. And I think if you also look at what apps are people downloading, you will have to compare what you're trying to do against what are the most popular apps. And the most popular apps are social networking apps, they're games, and they are utilities. So unless you're one of those three types of app, you're going to have a struggle getting people to put them on their phones anyway.
So you're talking a bit there actually about the problems with the different handsets for a site, but there are ways around that. What about the different app ecosystems that exist? We've got obviously Apple, Android, Microsoft, Samsung, BlackBerry. What are the kind of the pros and cons of those? I mean, where's it really at the moment? Where do you start with those?
I suppose before we get into the big debate of the wider, I think one of the interesting things, the differences between what Apple have done with their App Store and what we see, say, in the Android market is whether or not you've got a curated App Store, whether there's quality control. And it's interesting that, sort of in the early days of the web, people were kind of creating websites, digital properties, the tools were quite out there were lots of information that people could do, and so lots of content was created and there was lots and lots of innovation. Now, kind of the opposite things happened with Apple because it was very much more tightly controlled. It's like, well, you've got to get through our sort of approval processes, and I'm not going to tell you an awful lot about them, and there's this sort of slightly dark art to getting things through quickly, and that's led to some extent, some really good standardization. So if you download an Apple app, most people can use it straight away. They know kind of how the navigation's going to be. There's an interesting stat that iPhone app users are 30% more likely to convert to purchase than mobile web users. I think because there's a sense of confidence and trust around stuff that's come out of Apple, which is good and it's safe for consumers, but then does it hamper innovation? And you kind of got the other side, the uncontrolled ecosystem that is the Google Play Store, used to be called Android Market, where any one of us could go home and create an app, chuck it up there, and anyone could download it. So you start to get things like malware and people detecting what you can get from your phone sort of keyboard and that sort of stuff. So I think both have got pros and cons, and it's a really, really kind of interesting debate to have again as to what the benefits of each one.
As an Android user, I'd just like to what malware is out there?
What malware was on the Android operating system? So there were a couple of, when the Ice Cream Sandwich keyboard came out, for example, you could download that. There were 4 or 5 different clones of that had key capturing devices. So yeah, there is a decent amount of malware. It's not to be sort of scaremongering, stuff happens, but you are now having sort of virus companies popping up to start to qualify applications, that sort of stuff.
I mean, one of the things that's quite important to bear in mind about this is that there's a huge amount of PR put out across the web regarding malware, everywhere pretty much, but specifically on Android, which is coming straight out of all of the people who are selling the security software for phones. And actually there are very, 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 very few instances of any pieces of malware on any mobile phones, regardless of platform, that have gained anything like mentionable amounts of people who've been badly affected by it. and a lot of it has actually been sought out. So I would say that although it is more likely, and everything you've said is absolutely true in terms of curated marketplaces, most of the people who are now pitching up on mobile phones are obviously picking up Android phones, and they're not finding it a massive problem to use Play on Google to get the apps that they want. They've got pretty much the same number to choose from, and equally, the issue that they have, which is majorly different, I think, is that it's very difficult to find apps on there because there are so many apps that are actually of lower quality. So that's definitely true, and you would have thought coming from Google that the search on Google Play would be great, but it's not. It's absolutely awful.
So I think, yeah, I mean, put the malware debate to one side. I think if we talk about kind of consistency and the quality of application, I think that's something that is worth considering. You know, it's so easy to get lost in a sea of quite crap apps. You know, because there is this kind of, you know, my marketing director says that I need to make an app, and there's a lot of that out there. And I think the days of simulated pint glass and fart buttons that are going to get popularity have now passed. So I think before you take that leap into, right, we're going to build an app, think, can I achieve it through mobile web? Is there really the value to my consumer to get them to download this app and install it onto their phone? You know, and then am I going to maintain it? Am I ready to look after this application going forward as new versions of handsets are released and operating systems? So.
And whilst you should never ask 4 people from 4 different agencies how much an app costs, because you'll see quite a lot of aggressive undercutting going on. You know, the reality of it is for clients is that you know, this notion of versioning is incredibly costly. So to kind of, you know, enter into a marketing scenario where you want an app, when you want to buy an app, there's always a moment when we sit in front of clients and our tech director, or, you know, you sit there and say, well, you know, how do you want the app made? What do you want the app made for? Because you're literally multiplying the costs as you go, which is pretty terrifying.